It took Jack more than 30 minutes to arrive at George's residence. The area wasn't where the rich could be found. This was Yellow Street after all. After dropping him off, Jack went back to the rented apartment. Parking the Bentley Continental GT in the small parking lot, he immediately headed to his rented room. He decided to take a few clothes with him. After all, he had to change. Although he had an idea of buying new clothes, he didn't think that it was urgent. Since he wasn't going to abandon this apartment as he may need to stay in the Yellow Street sometimes if he was tired, he decided to leave a few sets of clothes. After that, he immediately headed back to the palace. He wanted to enjoy the king-size bed. After all, this would be his first night spending a night in a comfortable bed in a place that he could call home. He slept and only woke up when it was about 7:30 in the morning. He went towards the windows. They were floor-to-ceiling glass windows facing the east. As he pushed aside the curtains that had dragons and some other ferocious beasts drawings aside, Jack could clearly feel the warmth of the rising sun landing on his skin. He somehow felt refreshed and energetic. He then observed the sun as it moved higher. Without noticing, he had been standing there for more than 30 minutes. When he got back to his senses, he immediately went to take a shower before preparing himself a simple and sumptuous breakfast. Looking at the time, it was already approaching 9. So, he immediately got out of the mansion and headed to the parking lot. Taking the Bentley Continental GT, he drove out of the palace grounds as he headed towards the city center. He was going to look for the designer for his logo. As long as it was completed faster, then the cars as well as the uniforms that he'd ordered would be completed earlier. He arrived at a 10-story building. This was where the designer company that Sabrina had talked about was located. He headed inside and took the elevator to the 7th floor where the designer office was located. These designers were known as Canvas Graphics Arts. They were popular within the country and were also known as an international brand. Here in Incoet, this was just a small branch. Jack had decided upon this designer company because he wanted his enterprise's logo to be something that he could be proud of. He didn't want it to be amateurish as it would surely embarrass him in the future when his enterprise's reputation is at the top. He arrived at the lobby. Although it was just 9 in the morning, he could see that the designers were busy. After waiting for about 15 minutes, he was invited into an office. Although it was simple, the elegance of the room was top-notch. After a simple exchange of greetings with the lady in charge of the office, Jack immediately went straight to the point. I am going to start an enterprise. The enterprise isn't something that is going to be small, but one that can reach the international level. So, I would like your company to design a logo for me, one that I can use even if the enterprise has reached the international level. That can happen. Since you're saying that it would soon be an international brand, then that means that we'll have to request the top designers of the company at the capital city. The lady, whose name was Maggie, replied. She was already in her late 30s and was currently wearing an official business suit. She had an authoritative aura around her. This shows that she had been in a high position for a good period of time. I've got no problems about the price of designing the logo. The only thing that I would like would be that the process be sped up. After all, I've got somewhere that they're waiting for the logo so that the orders that I've placed can be completed. Jack said, "Oh, for the time, it would at most take a week as long as you take the VIP level service. The VIP level service is sold at $5 million. With this, the logo will be designed by one of the top designers in the headquarters." Maggie replied, "I don't want one of the best. What I want is the best. I don't know if I can get the best designer of your company to do this work for me," Jack asked. That might be a little problematic. After all, as the top designer, he's mostly busy and for a person to see him, they would need to make an appointment first. Maggie frowned a while before shaking her head. "Look, it doesn't matter how much it costs. I would really like to get the logo done as soon as possible. If there's a way for that to happen, I'm willing to pay the price." Jack insisted. Maggie thought for a moment before looking at Jack and said, "Let me make a call and do an inquiry first." Jack nodded in response. Maggie took the phone on the desk before calling. After talking for more than 3 minutes, she finally hung up as she looked at Jack. "I guess that you're lucky. There was a person that had made an appointment with him tomorrow, but he's just withdrawn. So, if you want, you can acquire this spot at a cost of $10 million. Maggie said. Jack let out a sigh of relief after hearing what she had said. It seems that his luck was quite good. There's no problem at all. I'll pay $5 million first before paying the rest tomorrow morning. Is that okay? Jack asked. He still had to spend money on other things today, and as a result, he wasn't quite willing to spend all the money that he was having. He still had to purchase a few more grocery stores today, and all of this required him to spend money. There's no problem at all. Maggie was at first surprised that Jack didn't even bargaining. And what's more, he was going to make pay 50% of the cost on the spot, and the rest would be paid the following day. But after thinking for a moment, she felt that it wasn't strange. After all, he had said that the enterprise that he was going to start was going to reach the international level. What's more, he had come to one of the top designer companies in the country. It was obvious that he was serious about what he was saying. But what made her curious was what kind of enterprise he was going to start. She could have asked, but her behavior didn't allow her to do so. She simply accepted Jack's payment and the details of the enterprise. The details were like the name, what the enterprise would be engaging in, and so on. When Maggie heard that the enterprise that Jack was going to start had no majors and minors, she was surprised once again. What Jack meant was that he would be in all the industries: the clothing, medicine, food, transport, and others. She then thought to herself, would this brand really reach the international level if it goes to all the areas at once? Maggie's thoughts weren't unfounded. After all, if a person wants to take a piece of every industry, then the capital that was needed was not only high, but the enterprise would surely have many enemies that would try to suppress it. Business was all about competition. There was no way a business would sit at the side while watching a rival rising to power. They would definitely try to look for ways to stop the rise. Of course, these thoughts were only there because she didn't know that Jack had the 100 times income multiplier system. No matter what, Jack could never suffer a loss. And why was that? He was sure that there was no way that the losses that the business would have incurred would reach 100 times the income that he'd earned. For example, if he was doing a business, during the process, he earned $1 million, he was sure that there was no way that the business would lose $100 million, right? With the system, the million would be multiplied to 100 million, which would be enough to cover for the losses that he would have suffered. After making sure that there was nothing wrong with the information that he'd submitted, Jack immediately drove to the Comes Grocers branch that he'd been to the previous day. He was going to meet the staff on this day. He'd already left the guards the message that George was allowed to enter the palace to get the Freightliner. So, he was sure that all the goods that were stored in the warehouse would be taken to the grocery stores. As soon as he arrived, he found that all the staff were ready to receive him. Daniel was present too, as he was the manager in charge of the stores. "Welcome, boss." As soon as they saw Jack getting out of the Bentley Continental GT, the working staff immediately shouted in unison. The faces of some of the younger female working staff were already getting red from agitation and admiration. Not only was Jack handsome, he was also rich. Just the car that he was driving had already attracted them. There were some of them that were already planning on how to get closer to him. They knew that the chances were low, but they were ready to try. "Good morning, everyone." As soon as Jack got in front of them, he immediately greeted them. His expression wasn't that cold, but his temperament was outspoken. Every of his steps and moves showed his dominating presence. This was a trait of all those that had been raised in a big family like Alfonso family. Jack hadn't engaged in the family business, but how he handled himself since young was still imprinted in his bones. After the greetings were out of the way, Daniel glanced at the slightly over 10 people and began the introduction. After the brief introduction, Jack got to know the names of his employees in this branch. Then, he thought for a moment and said, "You guys don't need to be stiff in my presence at all. All you need to do is work hard for the grocery store. As long as you guys work hard, there would be subsequent rewards for you." All of them immediately cheated after they heard that there would be rewards as long as they worked hard. As for the changes, for the time being, there will be no changes in the way that the business was operating. If there are any changes that I'd like to make, that'll take a little while longer, Jack said after the staffs calmed down. After that was done, he went with Daniel to the only office available. In case Daniel was at the headquarters of the grocery store, the one that would be using the office would be the person that was in charge of this branch, Wycliffe. Now that Jack was here, it was obvious that he would sit on the boss's chair. As soon as Daniel sat down, Jack spoke. "I've got several grocery stores in the city and am going to start a brand. So, I hope that you'll cooperate with others. I'll introduce them. As for now, there's one that's called George. He'll be delivering some products here later today." As Jack said this, he immediately gave Daniel George's contact information. "By the way, the supply of the stock and the methods of delivery, is there a problem?" Jack asked. "Currently, the contract that we had signed for the supplies is about to expire. So, there's a need for the renewal. Then, for the issue of deliveries, we always hire a vehicle with a freezer to do that." Daniel replied. "Okay, the issue of the contract, there's no need to worry about it. I've already signed a supply contract, so the stock wouldn't go down. Delivery, you can ask George. He's in charge of delivery. And if there's a problem of lack of enough vehicles, then you can just contact me and I'll get them." Jack nodded and replied. Daniel was surprised that there was an exclusive car that could he use to transport the grocery products. This would not only reduce the costs, it would also reduce the risks such as the driver running away with the goods or being careless and causing great losses. After he was done, Jack immediately got out of there together with Daniel as he visited the other branch and the main store. After that, he went and visited the other 4 stores that he'd just purchased. He left them with instructions before heading towards Yellow Street. He was thinking of buying a bigger shop so that he could transfer the current Alfix grocery store. This way, there would be no problems about the storage issues. After arriving at the store, he found both Agnes and Charles. Charles had thoroughly cleaned the store, and it looked better. There were a few customers coming in and out of the store as Jack parked the Bentley Continental GT. Of course, this was a car that was worth millions. As a result, there was a sensation as soon as Jack parked the Bentley outside the store. Although this wasn't the first time that such an expensive vehicle was coming to Yellow Street, it was rare to see one, not to mention one that was worth millions. "Wow, what a handsome guy. I wish I can get a boyfriend like him." "Hey, stop dreaming. Do you think that you're worth a person like him? He does look handsome and is rich. Is he some kind of second generation in the city, or from outside? Hey, are you an idiot? Can't you see that the registration number is for Inchoate? Now that you mention it, do you know what that car is?" "Yes, I saw it on the internet. This is a Bentley Continental GT. It's worth $7,399,999. That expensive? Do you think it is a joke? Anyway, what family do you think he's from? Never heard of him before. Anyway, what is he doing here in Yellow Street? In a grocery store at that. There are several big grocery stores at the center of the city. What do you know? Maybe he just wants to try how the products in this part of the city taste like. I thought that the things in the grocery are the same. It's just that the quality is low in the grocery at this part of the city. That's what I meant. Who are you fooling? How can a rich person decide to leave better food so that he can come and eat lower quality ones? Have you never seen a rich person eating in a stall by the road?" Jack cared none of this as he greeted both Agnes and Charles. According to them, George had left about an hour ago. So, he should be closer to coming back. Jack nodded and then thought of something. "Where you guys stay, is there a good parking space?" He asked both Charles and Agnes. Both of them were stunned for a moment. What's the use of a parking lot if they had nothing to park there? As if noticing their questions, he said, "The Bentley Bentayga Odyssean edition that I bought are for my employees. As long as it is work-related, the cars can be used. So, I was wondering whether there's a parking lot in your area that you can use the car in traveling." The two were immediately elated after hearing this. The boss treats his employees so well. They thought to themselves before bringing their minds back to the facts. "Boss, where I live isn't suitable for the car of that price to be parked there. Not only is the space limited, but there are some people who can damage the car there." Dejected, Charles replied, "The same here. Although the parking space is there, it's always full. The only place that we can use would be the government parking." Agnes replied. Jack had already been to George's place the previous night. He could see that there was no place for the car to be parked. That's the reason why he asked the two if they had a place that they could park the car. After thinking for a moment, he decided, "Can you guys relocate? I can get you an apartment with better conditions so that you can use it as staff's dormitory." "Why yes, boss. But won't that be too much? After all, the expenses and the income that we bring in don't match at all. In fact, the expenses are higher than the income," Agnes said after some hesitation. Don't worry about it. The business may be low now, but in the near future, maybe next month, you'll have to work harder. So, I am preparing you for a lot of work, Jack said. Upon hearing Jack's words, they remembered that he told them that he might put them in charge of groceries in 2 or 3 streets. That implied that he was going to expand the business. Furthermore, his action of buying many cars and at the same time having the employees getting the uniforms proved that he was rich and he wasn't going to run such a small store. After Jack left the store, he immediately headed towards Leviation agencies. He wanted to look for a good shop that could be used in Yellow Street. He wanted to get ready for the enterprise. They were a private one, and they could help him get an empty shop in the street. It didn't take long for him to get there. He headed to the familiar office. There, he found the familiar receptionist. Upon seeing Jack, the lady raised her brows in surprise, but calmed down a little while later. Great to see you again. How may I help you? She asked as soon as Jack arrived in front of her and took his seat. I want to get another shop. A bigger one, more than 5 times bigger, and it should be located at a place with a parking space. It should also be located at a good place for business. Jack stated. I guess you'll have to talk with the manager. I can't deal with that operation. As the lady spoke, she immediately got from behind the counter and led Jack towards another office. There, he found that there was a middle-aged woman. She was busy with something on her computer as she didn't even raise her head when she asked the receptionist and Jack to enter. After about a minute, she raised her head and looked at Jack and the lady. Seeing that she was paying attention, the lady spoke. Mr. Jack here wants to buy a shop in Yellow Street. The lady then went on to describe what Jack needed. After listening for a while, the woman looked at Jack in surprise as she spoke. Oh, we do have that shop. It has been a little while since the last time that a person asked about it. After all, the price of the shop is higher, but the location of the shop is Yellow Street, which is a small place. Jack nodded. This was the truth. After all, who would dare to spend a lot of money to purchase a shop, and the spendings of the customers in the area wouldn't be able to bring back the money spent? Of course, only Jack would do that. So, after going through the price and the image of the shop, Jack immediately agreed and paid the price for the shop. It cost him a total of $832,579. He took the certificates and headed to the shop. Then, he immediately headed to the shop's location. The shop's position was good. The size was good as well. It was just a little bigger than Comest Grocers. Jack nodded in satisfaction. He decided that he was going to make this the main grocery store in the entire street. As for Alfix, since it was small, he would immediately shift to this new shop as soon as the logo and renovation was done. He then left the shop, heading towards the parking area that was a few hundred meters away. He was getting closer to the car when he heard a sarcastic voice coming from the side. Isn't this Jack? It seems that you like sports cars, but you can't afford them. It was a male voice. Turning around, Jack was stunned upon seeing that the person who had just spoken was none other than Steve. And beside him, Brenda stood, looking at him with a sly smile. Jack had never expected that these two half-siblings would be able to find him even after he had left their mansion. Furthermore, he had made sure not to tell anyone where he was going to. But now, seeing that the two of them were here at the same time, then this was by no means a coincidence. They must have known where he was. Thinking things through, Jack immediately thought of the taxi that he'd used to get here. He remembered that it was Brenda that had called for it, and not he himself. That implied one thing. The driver had agreed to disclose his information. Although Jack was irritated, he still didn't blame that guy. After all, if he dared to go against Brenda, it was a sure bet that his life wouldn't end well. Jack simply took a deep breath and looked at the duo before asking, "What are you guys doing here?" Hee hee, Brenda chuckled as if Jack's question was funny. Then, she continued, "Of course, we're here to look out for our younger brother. I don't need it. I'm okay. You can just go back. No need to worry about me." Jack was direct with his words. From childhood till this moment, he knew that flattering these half-siblings of his wouldn't do him good. So, he had always been cold and direct with them, not hiding his thoughts at all. "Bah, what's up with you, Jack? We've come all the way from Crystal City to pay you a visit, and this is all that we get?" Brenda frowned as she asked, obviously pretending to be hurt. Jack bought none of her expression and said, "I don't remember inviting you to find me. I might as well pay for your transportation costs back to Crystal City. Hey, chill it down, boy. You know, there's no need to hide things from you. You were banished from the family. Now, we're here to make sure that you're not using the family name. After all, you using the name would surely demean our family's reputation. Steve spoke at this moment. Jack stared at him with a blank expression on his face. Then, he said in a low voice, "You know that I've never used the family name even while I was back in Crystal City. Why would I want to use it now?" "Are you sure? Because I am sure that you've got no money on you. If you're using the family's name to get someone to host you, then you have to break it immediately. After all, if you dare to do that, then our family would surely sue you," Steve said after a moment of silence. "Jack, you on need of cash? You can tell your sister here. She will surely give you some so that you don't live in streets." Brenda spoke with her signature sly smile. "I've already said that I don't need your concern. All right, if there's nothing else, I'll be on my way now." As Jack said these words, he completely ignored the two as he went to the Bentley Continental GT. Opening the door, he got in before driving off. The two siblings were left both wide-eyed and slack-jawed. They had never expected that Jack would be driving a car that was worth millions even after he had come from the family. From what they knew, Jack was a frugal person, wanting to save all that he could. Even back at the family mansion, he had never bought a car like his half-brothers or cousins. Although the clothes that he was wearing were pretty decent for a person from Alfonso family, it wasn't up to par. Now, he had left the family mansion and he'd bought a car worth millions? From what they knew, the total amount of money that would have saved wouldn't be enough to buy a Bentley Continental GT. "Do you think this car is his?" Steve asked. Although he was older, he knew that when it came to intelligence, he was far below Brenda. "From the way it is, I can see that it's new. That means that the car has been recently bought. But Jack doesn't have money to buy the car. So, it means that he has found someone to support him, he has borrowed the car, or he had somehow gotten money from the family during his stay there." Brenda spoke with her eyes narrowed. "For the first one, as far as I can remember, Jack has never left Crystal City. That means that he's got no connections here. The second one, since he has no connections here, there's no way that a person can give him a newly bought car. As for the third, I haven't gotten any information on money missing. And even if there was money missing, Jack was never given a responsibility, so it's impossible for him to get money." Brenda continued analyzing. As Steve heard all of this, he couldn't help but think to himself, what a frightening girl. The only thing that remains is that he has used the family influence to get someone to help him. And that person doesn't know that he's no longer a member of Alfonso family. Finally, Brenda came to a conclusion that she could accept. Steve remained silent all this while. He kept frowning while thinking, but there was nothing that he could think of that could match Brenda's thoughts. Brenda then glanced at the shop that Jack had just come from. She narrowed her eyes in suspicion. Then, her lips curled into a sly smile. She gazed towards the direction that Jack had left before saying, "Let's get going. We need to find where this Brad is getting money from." With that, the duo left the site as they headed towards the center of the city. Currently, Jack had a balance of $7,404,607. He wanted to purchase a building that would be used as the headquarters of Jackson Enterprise. But this amount wasn't enough to purchase a building that could host the reputation of an international-level enterprise. So, he decided to discard that thought aside. He would have to collect enough cash before going for the purchase. He would have to buy the biggest office building in the city. As he thought of this, he immediately drove to the government office in charge of shops. He wanted to continue buying grocery stores so that he could earn more income. On his way, he thought of something important. Having many grocery shops was fine, but they needed management. So, he would have to get himself a manager that could do that. He then made a decision. He would try and see if he could recruit a manager that was good in the grocery business. This way, he wouldn't need to worry about the issue of poor management of the stores. In about half an hour or more, he arrived at the office. He then marched through the familiar corridor that led to the office that he'd been to previously. When he reached the place that he'd collided with the lady the previous day, he stopped for a moment. For some strange reasons, his originally cold expression somehow melted as he revealed a rare smile. This smile perfectly matched his handsome face, making him show the charm that he was hiding. The blue eyes showed some kind of strange of emotion that they hadn't shown since he was 15 years old. After a moment of remembering what had happened the previous day, as well as the beautiful face that matched her extraordinary temperament, Jack finally headed to the office. "Welcome, Mr. Jack." The man, whom had attended to Jack the previous day, immediately welcomed him. Jack nodded in response. After taking a seat, the man spoke, "Mr. Jack, since you told me that you wanted the grocery stores, I made sure to make enough preparations for you." Unlike the previous day, his attitude this time was flattering. After all, as long as Jack bought more shops under him, then the amount of money that he would receive at the end of the deal would be big enough for him to go on a vacation. So, since the previous day that Jack had wanted to purchase the shops, he made sure to get more shops that could be sold. He went as far as persuading some owners to sell their stores. He offered good prices for the stores, which some of the owners felt that there was no harm in gaining some profit. But of course, there were some that wouldn't agree to sell their stores, no matter what. For this reason, the man decided that he would look for the most expensive stores that could be sold. In this way, although the number of stores that would be sold would be low, but the amount of money that would be brought in would be enough. Jack went through the folder that he had been given. He was slightly surprised upon seeing that in less than 24 hours, the man had already gotten more than 15 stores ready to sell them. The thing that made Jack's eyes shine was the fact that all of these stores were big, the size of Comest or bigger. Although they were good, Jack immediately knew that the price of these stores would surely be higher. "What's the collective cost?" Jack asked after closing the folder and returning to the man. The man immediately smiled. "The total price of those 15 stores plus the stock and the employee's salary is $14,653,000. As he said the price, his smile grew wider. Jack thought for a moment. Although the price was high, he could see that the conditions of the stores were good. They were making profits, and good ones at that. Furthermore, they were located in different places of the city. That meant that Jack's influence was already around the city. If they were located in the same place, he would obviously buy one and ignore the other one. How could he make his two stores compete instead of using the money to buy another store dealing in another area? "I'll give you $5 million now. Tomorrow at around 10 in the morning, I'll send the remaining balance. I don't know if that's okay with you?" Jack made his decision. One thing that he wanted to make sure of was that his card would never be empty. He wanted to have money, just in case there was an emergency. "Of course, Mr. Jack, I'll immediately do that," the man said while laughing happily. In just 2 days, he had sold shops worth over 10 million. And what's more, there was tomorrow. By the way, continue preparing the shops. As long as you make sure that the size is good and they're not competing with each other, then I'll buy them all," Jack stated. "Ha ha ha, sure, Mr. Jack," the man replied as he completely lost the etiquette of a government official. It has been 3 days since Jack met with his two half-siblings. During these past 2 days, he had already completed the payment for the logo design. Then, he handed it to the clothes and cars shop. This way, all of his orders would begin to be processed. At the same time, he didn't stop purchasing grocery stores. And since there were several of them and were at different parts of the city, Jack had no choice but to get a manager. Well, he got more than one manager, to be precise. It was just that there was a single one that had authority over the other 7. Jack had decided that the groceries would be divided into zones depending on their location in the city. He had decided on the 8 compass directions: north, east, west, south, northeast, northwest, southeast, and finally southwest. Each direction matched the city in that the northern zone was found in the northern part of the city. But of course, there was another zone that he hadn't selected a manager yet. He had promised Agnes, George, and Charles that he may make them the leaders of the grocery stores in 2 or 3 streets. He was going to fulfill that. But that would have to wait to the time that they were going to move to the new shop that he'd bought in Yellow Street. Not only was it spacious, it had a good parking space too. They had yet to move in, and it would need 2 more days before the renovation would be completed. He was doing the same with the other stores that he'd bought around the city. Of course, the renovation that he was doing on the other stores that had business running was just painting and adding the logo that had been designed by the best designer of Canvas graphics arts designers. They had completed and sent him the logo via his email this morning. Immediately after that, He had sent this to the managers of each region to get someone, a professional in painting of course, to insert the logo during the time that the business was low. All the groceries under him were now painted, being painted or would be painted lime green. This was going to be the color of his grocery department. During these past days, the income coming from the grocery department had been increasing and so was the amount that he was spending. But all the same, he was making sure to clear all the debts. Currently, the only debt on him was the one for the Prince and Princess Palace. He still had a debt of over 10 million that would be repaid soon as the projects that had been consuming money were at their final periods. As for the supply contract that he'd signed, the condition that was decided on was one of COD. With every delivery, Jack would have to make the payments within a day. This would go on until the $30 million order was completed. As for the staff uniforms, some had already been completed. A lime green top with a matching blazer, black bottoms. The logo of Jackson Enterprise was also printed on the left chest. And since this was the grocery department, there was AG.D added below the logo. Now, the only thing that he needed to do was ask a manager to go and collect them. The clothes were ready before, only needing the logo. Now that Jack had sent them the logo in the morning, they had printed them on a few of them. On the first night, he received $301,458. On the second night, he received $789,532. And on this night, Jack wasn't sure how much he was going to receive as he had made further purchases of the stores. Now, if these two were multiplied by 100 times, it would bring a total of $109,089,000. With this amount of money, Jack had no problem in paying for the stores that he purchased the previous day and today. Then, there was the issue about the first income reward. Jack had been told by the system that he could save them and receive all of them at the same time in the form of a higher quality reward. As a result, since Jack didn't want so many sports cars or motorcycles, he agreed to this. Currently, there were a total of 47 stores that Jack owned. He was going to make the final purchase the following day, and he would be closing the chapter about purchasing grocery stores in Inchoate City. The total expenses till this moment was approximately $72 million. This included the payment for the uniform, buying 8 more Freightliners, paying for renovation of the stores, buying an apartment for Agnes, Charles and George, buying a few pairs of clothes and paying for the stock purchase. He had also bought a total of 8 Freightliners. All of them were still undergoing repainting at this time before they get delivered, so that the stores in the 8 zones can start using them. As for the one that he'd bought before, that would be used by the Central Zone, located at the center of the city. Of course, there were no stores that he'd purchased there just yet. He would do so after buying an office building for Jackson Enterprise. Currently, there was no store under his name that lacked stock. The only things that would need refreshing would be those that were needed fresh. But for those that had a long shelf life, there were enough for a month or two. Flyer's bank account balance is $29,840,607. Jack was currently standing on the bridge while looking at the setting sun. The horizon was already painted orange as the sun had already sunk, but its hue was still being displayed. As the orange color of the horizon reflected on his blue eyes, a complicated feeling was rising with his heart and flooding to his eyes. For some reason, every night, he would either think of her before sleeping or he would dream about her. This was the first time that a stranger had occupied his mind in such a manner. He didn't know what to do about the strange feelings. He was getting an urge to go out and meet her, to at least see her face again so that his heart that had began beating out of rhythm could calm down. He let out a slightly frustrated sigh. He was wondering what was going on with him. He knew well that the city was big and there was no way that he could find her unless he had connections. But still, the connections that he'd built due far were just smaller ones and couldn't do much. He took a look at his newly bought watch and saw that it was already 10 minutes past 5 in the evening. This was the last day of the time that the system had given him to complete the task. Since today was July 17th, the temperatures were already at 19 degrees Celsius. It was summer after all. He had previously asked George where there could be some rich young masters of Inchoate City that liked racing. George had told him that most nighttime car racing occurred at a mountainous called Mount Bright. This mountain was mainly made of bare rocks and had little vegetation on it. But still, the roads that were made below the mountain or on some of the lower parts of the mountain were good. After looking at it in Google, Jack had seen that it was true. Furthermore, it seemed that the person who had planned the construction of the roads there had the intention of creating a place for racing. After all, the roads in the area around the mountain were rarely used, and what's more, they were in such a way that a person might think that they were racetracks due to the bends. Furthermore, they were in such a way that one could go several laps as long as she doesn't take the road that led back to the city. The special feature of this mountain was that it had a low altitude and didn't have snow. So, it didn't affect the temperatures around the city that much during winter, but the effects could be seen during summer. The temperatures at night were high on the western part of the city, closer to the mountain. Maybe that's why they called it Mount Bright? Jack wasn't sure about it. Jack went back to the prince's palace mansion. After taking his early supper, he got prepared for the race. He wore a white t-shirt, a pair of black jeans, and white sneakers. This outfit immediately outlined his well-sculpted body. With a matching handsome face, he really looked dashing. He got out of the mansion and headed for the parking lot. There, he found George waiting for him. Since it was going to be Jack's first time there, he needed a person to introduce him. George had been going there before. That was when he was still racing, before he began delivery work. "Good evening, boss." As soon as George, who was adorned in a pair of casual blue jeans, a black t-shirt, and a pair of polo shoes, saw Jack, he immediately greeted him enthusiastically. Since he was hired by Jack, the quality of his life had drastically improved, and it wasn't a week yet. Jack had gotten them an apartment where they stayed. Of course, this was the privilege that only the three of them enjoyed. Even in terms of transportation, they were using the Bentley Bentayga in case they were going to and from the store and the apartment. "Let's get going. You said that racing begins at 7? Jack asked as he entered the Bentley Continental GT. George got into the Bentley with a slight hint of hesitation on his face, remembering Jack's crazy driving, and replied, "Yes, boss. The racing will begin at 7 and registration will end at 6:45 p.m. Okay, put on that seatbelt. We're going." Currently, it's 45 minutes past 5. To get there, we'll need at least 30 minutes. So, sit tight. As Jack said this, he immediately began driving out of the palace before speeding towards Mount Bright. George, who was already shaking within, couldn't help but let out a slight smile while thinking to himself, "You guys think that you're professional drivers? Here comes a real pro in driving." Jack drove the Bentley on the road. He had made sure to choose the roads that were free of traffic. In this way, although he was driving at an incredible speed, George began overcoming his fear and feeling the thrill going crazy while driving. Although he wasn't the one that was driving the car, at least he could enjoy the thrill of being in the passenger seat while seeing how things blurred as they passed them. Even as George enjoyed how Jack drove the car and how fast as a Bentley Continental GT was, he didn't forget to think about the cause of his drop out of racing. Who clenched his fists as he thought to himself, "Although I'm not the one going to compete with you, there's someone who's even crazier than I when it comes to driving. Let me see how you're going to deal with this now." Even he thought of this, who shifted his attention to Jack, who was driving the car like it was something simple. One had to know that a Bentley Continental GT was a sports car. It can't be driven like all the other normal cars. In other terms, one had to be very experienced in driving so that he or she could drive the car at such a high speed on the highways. Jack don't drink too much of his driving skills, as he was now going to complete the task that he was assigned to by the system so that he could get the professional driving skill fully. True to Jack's estimation, they arrived at Mount Bright after 30 minutes of driving. In other words, they had arrived at the scene when it was already 6:15 p.m. George showed Jack the way to the parking area of those who were going to participate in the racing competition. After all, not all those that came to Mount Bright were going to participate in the competition. They were those who came just for fun, or those who came for betting. There was another group of people who came to support their favorite drivers. And not to forget the group of people who came here with the aim of making connections with the rich second generation that come here race. Upon seeing the Bentley Continental GT, the people in the crowd began making the wild guesses of who the owner of the car was. According to what they knew, all the rich second generation of Inchoate City had already arrived at the scene. Do you think you can guess who the owner of that car is? Why don't you go ahead and do the guessing? Am I supposed to guess who the owner is when I can clearly see that this car is newly bought and it hasn't been a week since it was purchased? Furthermore, From my location, there's no way that I can see who the driver is. I'm sitting right next to you. Then how do you expect me to guess who the person driving the car is when I can't see him either? Ha ha ha, I can already guess that there's a new person in our city. Maybe he's from another city and he has come here to have fun. Hey, don't make wild guesses yet. You may not know who will be coming out of the car after it stops. It may be an old geezer who is here to cause trouble. Perhaps that's your dad and that's why you are so sure about it. Can you guys be serious? Since when did old men start to fancy sports cars? Hee hee, you're right. As the fans and the betting maniacs began making their own speculations about who the new owner of the car was, the well-known rich second generation began making their way towards the parking lot. They were obviously curious about this newcomer. After Jack parked the car, he dismounted it alongside George. George was already familiar with this place, and so he began introducing Jack to what was supposed to be done or where he had to go if he needed something. The handsome appearance Jack immediately caught the eyes of the young ladies who had come here with their own aims. Wow, what a handsome guy. Do you think he can accept me to be his girlfriend? Look at yourself in the mirror before asking such a question. Yeah, that's right. Furthermore, do you even know if he has a girlfriend? It doesn't matter. I can be his side chick. Bah, you're not qualified to compete with me. Only I can be his side chick. Get lost. If not for your thick makeup, I'm sure that you wouldn't dare to be so thick-skinned. Mike, me and you, we're done. I am going to look for that Mr. Handsome to marry me. Faith, aren't we already engaged? You and who? I didn't accept the engagement. Here's your ring. But you accepted my proposal back then. I was muddle-headed back then. Ha ha ha, Mike, you've just been dumped by your girlfriend for a man that she's never seen before. Look at my girlfriend here. She didn't do something like dash. Hey Sam, from this moment on, just like she did, I'm dumping you as well. Are you serious? Ha. The crowd of young ladies had already began discussing who will be married by Jack. This immediately attracted the envious gazes of their admirers and dark faces of their boyfriends. Jack, who was just meeting the second generation of Inchoate City, didn't know that he had just caused the hearts of many boys to be broken, or that he had just attracted the hatred of most of the boys. Look who it is. Isn't this George? I didn't know that you'd be rich after leaving. A sarcastic voice echoed from the small crowd of the rich second-generation youths. Jack looked at the group of young ladies and young men in front of him. They were draped in the recent fashion-branded clothing and accessories. Since it was summer, there were some that had left parts of their skins exposed, mostly girls. Most of these youths were at the age of 17 to 25, and 25 was the highest that the group would accept, but even so, the younger ones mostly interacted amongst themselves. Young Master Ismail, long time no see. George replied. Although he tried to keep calm, Jack could see that George was angry. He wondered what was going on, but he could still link all of this to George's retirement from racing. Humph, I thought that you won't be participating in racing again. As he spoke, he got to the front from behind the small crowd. He had short hair that was dyed yellow. He was wearing a branded trouser with a branded t-shirt. His handsomeness rating would be at 87. With his bulky body, it was obvious that he was building it by visiting a gym. He was Ismail Cruz, a member of the Cruz family in Inchoate City. The Cruz family was one of the 5 biggest families found in Inchoate City. In Inchoate City, there were 6 families that led in business and assets in the city. The first 5 were Cruz, Radvon, Faro, Jeter, and Sapona. These 5 families had almost the same assets, and their competition was intense. Of course, although they were competing, it wasn't to the extent that they were enemies. Although they were competing, their younger generation were always hanging out together. Then, there was a family that, just like Alfonso family in Crystal City, had the most influence in Inchoate City. It was the Raymond family. Most of the time, it was referred to as the overlord of Inchoate City. Currently, all the members of the 5 big families were present. There were others from smaller families as compared to the big 5, but they had assets worth at least 100 million. From how Jack could see, it seemed that George and this Ismail had a history. But he wasn't going to get involved as long as nothing overboard happened. I'm not here to race. It's my boss that's here to participate in the race. George replied with a proud voice. Even as he spoke, His nose was pointed to the sky subconsciously. The group of youths immediately stared at Jack and began scrutinizing him. From Jack's casual clothes, they couldn't find anything special about him apart from his handsome face. But they knew that he wasn't someone simple, considering the fact that he could afford to purchase the Bentley Continental GT. It was worth close to 10 million. "Hello, I am William Farrow." A handsome youth stepped forward and stretched his hand to greet Jack. "Hello, I'm Jack," Jack greeted back. His introduction simply mentioned his name and didn't mention what family he came from. William's intention of mentioning his family name was so that Jack could introduce his family, so that they could know where he came from. But since Jack didn't introduce his background, William was forced to ask, "What family are you from?" Jack knew that this would happen, but all the same, he wouldn't use the name of the family that never treated him as part of them. So, he simply shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, but I can say anything about that." Upon hearing this, the crowd of youths immediately had their brows raised with interest. If a person could afford the car and couldn't mention his background, could he be a member of one of those hidden families? They were immediately interested with Jack's background. But, since he couldn't say anything about it, they decided not to ask for now. After all, they thought that as long as they got his trust, they would know. "Okay then, George said that you're here to race. I guess that you're a professional?" William immediately changed the topic. "Nah, I'm just a beginner," Jack replied. This answer made George, who was standing beside him proudly while seeing the rich second gen of the city greeting his boss respectfully, nearly rolled his eyes. "What beginner? If you're a beginner, then there are no drivers in the world," he thought to himself. Well, William was stumped on what to say next. "Hello, Jack. I'm Anderson Jeter. You're here just at the right time. We're going to have our weekly race. The final prize is 5 million. You want to join?" Upon seeing that William couldn't speak anymore, a youth with brown eyes, shoulder-length black hair and handsomeness rating of 90 spoke. When Jack heard about the prize, he was immediately excited. With the system's multiplier, he would get 500 million, just enough for him to stabilize the grocery department. He was just about to reply when an arrogant voice came from the side. There's no need for him to participate. He has never participated in a race before. All those present turned their gazes towards the source of the voice. There, they saw a young man and woman heading their way. All the youths here were from the top families of Inchoate. With Inchoate being closer to Crystal City, they had of course been able to see these two figures. They were well known, and this group of people also respected and admired them. These two newcomers were none other than Steve and Brenda, Jack's half-siblings. They had been staying in Inchoate City in the past 3 days. Their aim was finding who in Inchoate City helped Jack. But even after staying here for such a long time, they hadn't found a single clue about it. Furthermore, Jack's moves were erratic that they couldn't follow them at all. Today, they had been invited by the second generation of Inchoate City to participate in the racing competition. This was a weekly major event after all. They had accepted, and that was why they were here. But they had never expected that their brother Jack would also be here. And from what they could see, they found that he was just getting to know these second generation. Now, they knew that he'd no relationship with them. Then, where was he getting the money to buy a sports car? In just a minute, the duo had arrived before the group. As soon as they arrived, the youths immediately began flattering them, wanting to build connections with them. After all, with the help of Alfonso family, it wouldn't be hard for their families to develop. "Young Master Steve, young Miss Brenda, welcome," William said with a smile. He stretched his hand for a handshake, but the duo ignored him, causing him to retrieve his hand awkwardly. The others also went ahead to greet them, but after learning from William, none of them stretched their hands forward. After the greetings were over, the group from the top families in Inchoate City were kind of flustered, not knowing what to do next in accordance to Steve's previous words of Jack not participating in the race. "You guys don't worry that much. We're here to participate in the race. We'll up the race's prizes." Brenda spoke with a smile on her face. Then, she turned her gaze towards Jack, who was standing there indifferently, and said, "Jack, I don't think you should participate in the racing. After all, you're not good at racing. You'll only embarrass yourself, and that's not a good thing." The group of youths were surprised by the fact that it seemed that Jack and the duo knew each other. And from what they could tell, the relationship between them wasn't that good. In fact, it seemed that the two didn't like Jack. On the other hand, Jack seemed not to care about them. Jack glanced at her for a moment before shifting his gaze towards Steve, who was glancing at him with a disdainful gaze. I already told you that you don't have to worry about me. I can handle myself. Furthermore, my reputation doesn't concern you. Jack's voice was quite cold rather than his usual indifferent one. Alex's words caused the atmosphere to tense. The rich second generation didn't know what to do about this situation. Furthermore, they knew that they were not allowed to interrupt the duo, Steve and Brenda, as the moment that they made them dislike them, the families behind them would surely suffer. Come on, lil bro, don't be like that. I've known you since you're young, and you've never participated in a race before. So, am doing this for your own good. Brenda spoke, ignoring Jack's previous words. The youth's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. They finally found something that linked the three. It seemed that they were siblings. And they had an argument. Since this was a family issue, they won't dare to put in their noses. On the other hand, they were quite surprised that Jack was a member of Crystal City's Alfonso family. Even George, who was beside Alex, finally had some understanding. He'd previously seen Jack's name being Jackson Alfonso. This was the name on his ID and the contract that they'd signed when he took him in as his new employee. Jack frowned. It seems that these two are here to cause trouble for me. But there's no way that I'm going to let that happen. I have to participate in the race, and I'll have to win. Otherwise, I won't have enough time to find another place to race before the time that I was given by the system ends. Jack, why don't you just get lost from here? I'm not sure where you got this car from, but I think that you shouldn't participate in this race, Steve arrogantly spoke. Jack looked at him and said, why don't we make a bet? A bet? Why will we make a bet with a loser like you? Steve laughed out loud as he looked at Jack funnily. I know why you guys have been staying in Inchoate City lately. If you win the bet, I'll tell you. If you lose, then you'll have to disappear from Inchoate City tonight, Jack stated. Upon hearing Jack's words, the two turned and gazed at each other. Then, they saw the same glint in each other's eyes. They turned towards Jack and Steve said, it seems that your brain is still working well. But, what do you want us to bet on? The stakes are already out. We're betting on the race. Whoever wins the race wins the bet, Jack said. After a moment of silence, Steve burst in a fit of laughter while Brenda chuckled coquettishly, causing the boys around to fix their gazes on her with their faces flushed. Racing? I thought that you had something else that you wanted us to compete in. Never thought that you would choose the department that you're worse in. After laughing for a while, Steve finally couldn't hold it anymore as he mocked Jack. George frowned as he thought of Jack's superb driving skills. He then wondered to himself, if Jack's driving skills were said to be amateurish, then didn't that mean that this Steve guy was far better in driving? He couldn't help but wonder. You betting on it or not? Jack asked indifferently. He wasn't going to prove anything in words. Only his actions could prove his true capabilities. Okay. Let's bet then. Steve laughed again before calming down to reply. After that, George took Jack to the registration area. Although the rich second generation of Inchoate City were sponsoring the race, they weren't the owners of the competition. So, even they had to register to race. This was the rule. After registering, Jack then shifted his focus to his half-siblings. He knew them too well. Even if he won the bet, he was sure that they would go back in their words, and there was nothing that Jack would do them, or so they thought. So, just in case, Jack made a proposal. Why don't we sign a contract? In this way, none of us will go back on our words. The duo stared at him for a moment. Then, Brenda raised her brows and asked, you don't trust your family? Oh no. I forgot that we're no longer a family. As for her exposing that Jack couldn't afford such a small amount of fare, it was obvious that she was trying to make sure that he was embarrassed. But Jack wasn't going to be embarrassed at all. I don't care about that. Let's just sign the contract, to be on the safe side. For me, of course, Jack said as he decisively headed towards the area where there was a printing machine. It was a small office. This was the office that was in charge of registration and administration of the racing rewards. After telling them what he wanted, a staff member typed and printed a simple contract. The contents of the contract was simple. The loser of tonight's race, between the two sides, will have to fulfill their end of their bet. If not, they would be banned from participating in a racing competition for 3 years. The organizers of this racing competition had the ability to do that. After all, they were not just based in a single city, but multiple of them, Crystal City included. After signing the contract, it was time to increase the prizes of the race. Steve forked out $3 million, while Brenda gave out $2 million, totaling it to $5 million. On the other hand, Jack gave $3 million as well. This made the duo frown, wondering just how much money Jack had in his pockets. But they didn't ask, as they knew that Jack wouldn't tell them even if they asked. They would have to wait till he lost the race. The first position would receive a total of $8 million. The second position would receive $5 million. The third place would get $2.5 million. Now that all the stakes had been placed, each and every one of them that wanted to participate in the racing competition got into their respective cars. Jack got into the driver's seat and George took the co-driver's seat. Then, they waited for the last few minutes to pass so that the race could start. Inside the Bentley Continental GT, George looked at Jack with a serious expression. Although he didn't know what had brought Jack's siblings in Coet, it seemed important in that even after staying here with their influence, they could still figure nothing out. On the other hand, what Jack wanted was for them to scram and leave Coet City. Just from this, he could tell that the relationship between the siblings wasn't good at all. Steve had said that Jack's driving skills were at the amateur level. George himself had seen how well Jack was in driving. But if that was considered amateur, then that Steve was supposed to be a professional racer. If his boss lost, not only would his reputation be stained, after all, he was the one that had initiated the bet, but also, the other second generation from Coet City would likely go against him to please Brenda and Steve. "Boss, are you sure about winning this race?" he asked when he saw that Jack's face didn't have any hint of nervousness at all. In fact, he'd only seen his boss smile twice, and that was just for an instant. As for getting angry, he'd never seen him get angry at all. The only thing that was usually etched on his handsome face was indifference. "Don't worry about that. If I couldn't win, then why would I want to bet with them? I might as well tell them what they wanted to know, or I might as well say nothing and leave," Jack replied while his hands held the steering wheel. George nodded upon hearing this. After all, with the current law, there was absolutely no way that the duo could force Jack to say what he didn't want to say. So, he decided to keep quiet and wait for the time. Just like that, they stayed in the car playing with their phones for Jack and chatting for George. At exactly 6:45 p.m., the engines of the cars roared. And with the roars of the cars, the mountain area was lit up. The lights that had already been set up before were lit, illuminating the racing tracks, of course, just the normal tarmac mountain road. The spectators immediately began cheering for those that they were supporting. There were several discussions on who was going to win the race and so on. As the cars drove towards the starting line, the crowd cheered even louder. After all, that was a lineup of sports cars. There were Aston Martins, Nissan, McLaren, Bentleys, and other brands of sports cars. There were some that had a hobby of collecting the images of sports cars. And this was the right place. Jack drove his Bentley Continental GT to the starting line. He could see that all the cars present were worth at least $1 million and above. Furthermore, the Big Five all had cars worth at least $5 million. By coincidence or not, on Jack's left side of the starting line, Steve stopped there. Brenda winded down the car window as she looked at Jack curiously. Jack hadn't closed the car window, and as a result, he could be seen by the duo. "Are you sure about this, Jack?" Brenda smiled as she asked. She was sitting on the co-driver's seat inside a Lamborghini Huracan. This was the most expensive car in the lineup present today. It was worth $11 million. That included the costs of modification. The cheers from the crowds began echoing, although they couldn't be heard well due to the loud roaring of the engines. At this time, a large screen descended in front of the cars, on top of the pillar that was standing tall in front of the starting line. On it were the names of the cars and their drivers. At the very top of the screen, there was a countdown to the start of the race. As the 5 seconds countdown went down slowly, the engines roared even fiercely. Inside the Bentley Continental GT, Jack gripped the steering wheel tightly as he gazed at the screen. His foot was already on the accelerator, and the car was ready to charge forward at a moment of notice. Currently, There were more than 15 cars that were going to participate in the race. Closer to the back of the cars, the Bentley Continental GT had a manual and automatic gear system. Currently, Jack was using the manual one. In this way, his control over the car was higher. Vroom. Scree. As soon as the countdown reached 0, he released the brakes, released the clutch, pushed the throttle. With that, the car shot forward alongside the other sports cars. George had already put on his seatbelt. He was the one that was going to tell Jack about the road, as this was Jack's first time here. The crowd cheered as they watched the cars disappearing into the distance. There were several drones that had cameras on them. Then, there were several screens that showed the current situation of the cars that were racing. On the screens, they could see that the leading car was a Nissan GT-R. But it wasn't long before it was overtaken by a McLaren 720s. The competition was clearly fierce. This was a one-lap race. But this one lap wasn't short, as it would take these cars at least 30 minutes for them to complete it. One had to know that these were all sports cars and they were moving at their maximum possible speeds. The record that had been set so far was a car that had finished the lap in 00:31:52:66. Since 5 years ago, nobody had broken that record, not even the record holder, who was now a professional racer. Who do you think will win this race? William will definitely take it. Get lost. I know you have a crush on him, but this time, Kelly will definitely win. Bah, what a shameless guy. Do you think that I didn't see you sneaking her a few glances? Humph. I bet $300 that Anderson will win this race. I bet $1,000 on that Lamborghini. Hey, so you think that just because it's fast it'll win? You don't know about racing at all. This only depends on the driver. Why do you care? It's not like him using your money to bet, right? I bet $5,000 on that new Bentley Continental GT. Several people placed their bets on the cars that they thought would win, while others were already daydreaming about what would happen after their idol won the race. On the racing track, Jack was shifting gears like a madman, according to George, of course. Jack's face was currently calm while his eyes were sharp as they focused on the road. His hand moved to shift the gear while the other one remained on the steering wheel. The speed of the car was already past 180 miles per hour, and it was still accelerating. Boss, there's a sharp corner towards the left about 700 meters from here, George said as he wiped the cold sweat on his face. He had previously thought that Jack's driving of the Bugatti Veyron was already crazy, but now he had to change his opinion. This corner was where the leading characters would start emerging. Currently, Steve's Lamborghini Huracan was already in front of them by about 100 meters. After all, its speed wasn't low and it was customized for racing. Jack calmly nodded his head in response as the speed of the car began increasing further. In no time, the speed was already past 200 miles per hour. This immediately frightened George to the core. B-Boss, did you hear me? There's a sharp corner ahead. George couldn't help but remind Jack about what he just said. I know, Jack replied, but he had no intention of slowing down at all. This action immediately attracted the attention of the other drivers as well as the spectators. What the heck with him? Does he want to die? This guy is not slowing down at all. Do you think he's gone crazy? This car is new and so is the driver. Maybe he doesn't know about the track? Ha ha ha, this fool. He dares to participate in the race without trying out the road? As the audience and drivers talked, the cars reached the corner. Many of them had already slowed down drastically as soon as they were a few hundred meters from the corner. On the other hand, Jack used this opportunity to surpass most of the cars until there were only 3 cars in front of him, Steve's Lamborghini Huracan being among them. They drifted at the corner at a slower speed before accelerating after getting past it. Jack could see that Steve's skills were indeed good as he did a drift. Furthermore, he was the one that led the race after the corner. On the other hand, Jack didn't slow down at all. He knew that his car had a disadvantage as it was not customized for racing. So, he would be using these corners to his advantage so that he could win the race. As soon as he was just tens of meters from the corners, Jack's professional driving skills kicked in. He stepped on the brake to transfer some weight to the front of the car and flicked the steering to initiate the drift. Maintaining the drift by lifting off the throttle to reduce drift angle, he added more throttle to increase it. He then transitioned the drift by slightly over-rotating the car towards the left just before changing the direction, and then lifted off the accelerator. The car slid on the track in such a way that people thought that it was going to turn over. But to their surprise, although the left side tires got off the ground, the car didn't flip. As soon as the car got past the corner, the tires landed onto the ground. Jack then released the throttle at the correct time and eased off the steering angle. Then, he accelerated forward, easily surpassing one of the cars that was in front of him, inside which was the stunned female driver, Kelly. Did you see that? Do you think that I am blind? I've fallen for him. You? Even Sir Isaac Newton's law of universal gravity can't allow you to do so. How can you fall for him? Anyway, he's crushing me. Alternate way of saying that Jack is his crush. Get lost, you're daydreaming. Hey, it's 7 p.m. now, it's night. How can I daydream? You ask yourself, after all, you're the one daydreaming, not me. This is a professional driver, a professional racer. Where was he hiding all this time? Maybe he's from another city. Open your dog eyes and see the registration number of the Bentley Continental GT. It's from Inchoate City. You, open your dog brain. Do you think that if I buy a car in Crystal City, I'll be a resident there? The commotion caused by Jack's driving skills wasn't small, as even those that were in charge of the racing competition were greatly impressed by his driving skills. On the other hand, Steve frowned the moment that he saw that Jack's car didn't flip over at such a sharp bend. He was wondering what was going on when Brenda, who was seated in the co-driver's seat, spoke. It seems that our lil brother has been hiding all these years. What do you mean? Steve asked with a frown as he turned his gaze back to the road. Since he had slowed down drastically, his speed was still accelerating. On the other hand, Jack's Bentley was catching up as it had only reduced its speed by a small amount at the corner. During the past 3 days, he's been going to the government building in charge of the stores found in the city. When we asked about it, we were told that he was purchasing a grocery store, a few of them to be precise. Brenda analyzed. On the first day that we met him here in Inchoate City, he was coming from a store. And now, that store has been turned into a grocery, although it doesn't have the stock yet. He bought a Bentley Continental GT, and he has the capital that can be used to start more than 3 grocery stores. Now, he's got good driving skills. I can guess where his money is coming from. Racing. He must have been participating in racing secretly without our knowledge. And now, he's won several prizes in that. He's accumulated quite a sum of money on him. Brenda concluded. Hiss. What a cunning little man. It seems that we've underestimated him, just like his mother. Steve spoke. The car fell into momentary silence. The commotion was brought only when they heard the sound of a car engine approaching them. Looking at the side mirror, Steve could clearly see that currently, the gap between them had been reduced. Furthermore, Jack's Bentley was already closer to overtaking William's Porsche 911 that was currently in the second place. He stepped on the gas as the car accelerated furthermore. Upon noticing this, Brenda frowned and said, You better stop fooling around. There are several corners up ahead. If you keep up with this speed, there might be an accident. Worry not. I know my limits. Even as he said that, he accelerated further, using the speed of the Lamborghini Huracan to the maximum, increasing the gap between him and Jack and William, who were now at a tie. George took a deep breath as he tried calming down. He had almost been frightened to death when the car almost flipped over. Looking at Jack's calm and indifferent expression, he couldn't help but wonder to himself, was it just a coincidence that the car didn't flip over, or was this due to Jack's professional driving skills? Jack didn't say a word as he continued accelerating. He wanted to win this race well, and winning it well meant that he'd have to give the second place a considerable gap. As for the record, he would of course break it. Ding! It was a sound that came from the car's dashboard. Jack glanced at it and found that the download of the map had been completed. He had decided to completely download the map of Inchoate City so that he could use the car's special navigation system. Now that it was done, he pressed a button that zoomed the map. There, it showed his current position, speed as well as the road that he was on. So, he marked the finishing line as the end location and navigated from his current position. In a short moment, a path was formed. This path that he could follow was one that the Bentley Continental GT would have no problem in using. You can tell me if the road that is shown on the map is the one that we're supposed to follow during the race. Jack stated simply to the flabbergasted George. George nodded his head, still in a daze as he stared at the car's navigation system. As time moved, he could see that the map was becoming clear and clear, to the situation where it was almost looking like a satellite map. He could see the car, although not clearly. The path that they were following was currently yellow as it wasn't clear yet. This Bentley's navigation system was quite digital, he thought to himself. In the next moment, he was forced to come back to reality as he stared at the map. Unknowingly, they had already arrived before an S-shaped bend. Although it wasn't a perfect S shape, the corners were quite sharp. So, at this time, William, who was forced to reduce his speed, was already disappearing from the corner. Just like before, Jack did a drift. Unlike the last time, Jack didn't reduce the speed of the car at all on this corner. There were a total of 4 corners so far on the S bend, and on all of these bends, Jack never slowed down. And the car never showed any signs of flipping over as well. The reason for this was obviously due to Jack's familiarity of the road through the car's navigation system. He could already tell what shape the road was going to take next. As a result, he was able to make ample preparations. On the 3rd corner, Jack passed Steve, who was forced to slow down due to the many corners. Otherwise, he would have ran off the tracks. Jack didn't even spare their Lamborghini Huracan a glance as he overtook them. In the 4th corner, Steve could only see the Bentley Continental GT's taillights. The racing track that was chosen was full of corners. After all, the show of a driver's skills was on these corners. There was absolutely no thrill in racing on a straight racing track. After overcoming his fear, George began enjoying the way that Jack was driving. He also made sure to look at the way that Jack was switching gears. But he was forced to give up as nothing that Jack did made sense to him. So, he put his mind to enjoying the ride. Although he couldn't see what Jack was doing to be able to easily drift on the sharp corners, he made his mind to ask him after this. Just look at it go. This is what we call driving cars professionally. Yeah, you're right. All the others are amateurs in front of him. Ha ha ha, I made the right bet. Now, I've earned big. The odds of the Bentley winning was 2.5. Too bad I didn't bet even more. Otherwise, I'd have earned bigger. Brother, remember that I was the one that told you to place the bet on him? Yeah, I remember. But you should have placed a bet as well. Haven't you won too? Well, you know, I bet on the Lamborghini. So, you were trying to make me lose money? And you're still shamelessly stretching over your claws to ask for money? Get lost, you evil creature. Although the race was only halfway, for the first person, of course, the spectators already knew who the winner of this race was. But that didn't make them lose their interest in the race as they focused all of their attention on how Jack tackled the corners. Currently, there was nobody who could see the Bentley Continental GT's taillight. Even so, Jack didn't slow down. It seemed that the management had also seen that Jack was what all the spectators were interested in, even those that had lost their bets. Although their hearts were bleeding, they could still endure it to watch the top-notch driving skills. So, all the screens but 2 were showing the Bentley Continental GT. The other 2 showed the Lamborghini Huracan and Williams Porsche 911. This was just to give them some face as they were in the 2nd and 3rd place. Vroom. The sound of a roaring engine made the eyes of the spectators to shift from the screen towards the source. And upon seeing the Bentley Continental GT, the crowd was at first stunned before they began cheering wildly. They had been staring intently on the screen and that they forgot that the finishing line was the same as the starting line. So, they had forgotten that the Bentley would still come to the starting point. As the Bentley Continental GT crossed the finishing line, the crowd erupted in cheers. In total, there were about 10,000 people gathered here to watch the race. In such a way, through loud cheers shook the night and traveled till they reached the city. This forced the people that were still outside to look towards Mount Bright. At the same time, those that were in their houses moved the curtains aside as they looked out of the window. The cause of such an eruption wasn't just because Jack had won the race. It was because he'd broken the record that had been set 5 years ago. He'd taken far less time to finish the race. Now, the new record read 00:24:39:98. Jack had finished the race in 24 minutes. This was mind-blowing. He'd broken the record by about 7 minutes. Minutes, not seconds. The crowd was cheering the name Jack crazily. The ladies, If not for the restrictions that prevented them from reaching the area where the participants were, they would have already rushed there to get his number. Driving Deity Jack. Driving Deity Jack. Driving Deity Jack. Driving Deity Jack. That was the slogan that was being shouted when the second place. Steve arrived almost 9 minutes later, followed by William, who was 10 minutes behind, and finally Kelly, who was just 30 seconds or so behind him. When William alighted from the car, he couldn't help but stare at the calm and composed Jack. He then muttered to himself, "He surely deserves this title, Driving Deity Jack." With a smile, he headed towards Jack to congratulate him. But he was forced to stop when he saw that Steve and Brenda were ahead of him, as they had already arrived before Jack.